Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 9th of December. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC researcher Jeremy Beck. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, Italians join global revolt against banking dictatorship, and fake news loses in Syria. US, UK-backed terrorists routed from Aleppo. Jeremy, before we begin, we have to remind the viewers, again, we are on the countdown till the end of the CEC's broadcast on Channel 31, Channel 44, which will go till the 31st of December and then switch over to the internet. So I encourage viewers, again, to keep watching this. If you watch on Channel 31 or Channel 44, you have to go to the internet and get either watch us after that on the Channel 31 platform, online platform, or sign up to our YouTube site, the CEC YouTube channel, as a subscriber. It costs no money, you just click the button to subscribe and you will get notifications every week then when the show is produced. So we're going to miss being on Channel 31. That's a legacy of the Malcolm Turnbull era, unfortunately. We may have other interesting developments next year we're working on to be able to stay on some form of TV format, but we'll let you know when we do. In the meantime, get used to watching us online. And by the looks of our YouTube channel, Jeremy, people have started doing that, which is great. Also, before we begin, as usual, anything we discuss on the CEC report is usually treated in detail in our weekly publication, the Australian Alert Service. So if you want any information about what we've discussed, more elaboration, call in on our toll-free number to get a copy of the Australian Alert Service. For first-time callers, it's free. All right, so we just want to encourage you to do that. So, that said, let's get to this week's show. Italians join global revolt against banking dictatorship. So, Jeremy, what happened last Sunday was stunning, right? And what's happened now, though, is it's starting to become the norm. And I think we actually addressed this on the show a few weeks ago. None other than Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, said, look, actually before the Trump election, he said, what happened in Brexit is now the new norm. Because what used to be the mainstream are the out-of-touch elites, and what used to be the extremes, the people that no one considered, they are now the mainstream. So we've had Brexit. They didn't see Brexit coming. We had Trump. They didn't see Trump coming. And there's a lot of effort to try and undermine the Trump vote by saying, look, he was 2.5 million votes behind Hillary Clinton. Yes, that's true, but those votes are concentrated in California and New York City.
Yeah,
right?
as the president, you've got to govern for the entire country, not just for a few big cities.
Exactly.
And if you look at the map, Trump had a huge amount of red all over the United States from the forgotten man and woman that just got left out of the whole process.
And if you want further proof, if you want to look this up online yourself, look for the map that shows the states in red and blue, and then look for the map that shows the counties in red and blue, and that's even more dramatic because even in these states like California and New York, Trump won stacks of counties outside of the major population centres, right? And Hillary, by the way, was also trying to win the same states, right? Based on the rules, she lost. The point is, though, they didn't see Trump coming, all right? Well, you just had this vote in Italy, and experience has now taught the elites we should expect this. And they got what they expected, but this time by a massive margin. If the Prime Minister of Italy had have known this outcome, he wouldn't have called the referendum, I'm sure. He assumed he'd get the support, but they voted it down 60 to 40, right?
That's a big margin. Big margin.
Now, I want to add here, we're going to elaborate in a minute on how this is a revolt against globalisation and the details of it, but this phenomenon is bigger than just 3 votes, though. This happened before Brexit. The support for Jeremy Corbyn and the Labor Party in the United Kingdom, which mushroomed up from the grassroots and turned into the biggest party in Europe against Wall Street and against the Blairites, is part of the same phenomenon, right? That came out of nowhere. Go back further though, we can forget this, but it's still legitimate. The election of Syriza in Greece a few years ago was actually the same phenomenon. It was the Greek people then saying, we reject what you've done, we reject the mainstream parties now. We're going to go to this alternative.
And it's not left-wing versus right-wing politics. A lot of people just don't get it in the mainstream media. You know, they think, oh, this is Trump right-wing politics. No, it's just people have been left out of the system. They don't have a job. And the same on the left with Jeremy Corbyn. You know, people have had a gutful of this globalisation. So they're losing out.
Now, while I'm talking, I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen, and it's either going to be a really clear graphic or a picture of a man in front of a screen showing a graph. The funny shape of that graph, what people have to, when you look at it, understand that what it means is the part that dips right down before it goes up on the right-hand side, that is the former middle class in the world, which was mainly based in Western economies. And that graph, the change in that graph shows that middle class has collapsed in a percentage terms, right? That is the vote for, that we're seeing. That's the voter revolt, that former middle class. All right, so let's talk about it here in regards to Italy. In Italy, it's the victims of globalisation. As with these other votes, it's the victims of globalisation that revolted. The highest no votes came from the southern regions of Italy, with the highest unemployment and the highest youth unemployment, and the northern regions of Italy, which is the heartland of industrial Italy, but has suffered the most deindustrialisation, right? So Jeremy's here to help understand what the specific issue was about. What were the constitutional changes they were voting against, Jeremy?
It was effectively fascism, really. You have, since World War II, the governments in Europe, some of the governments in Europe were specifically set up to stop the rise of fascism once again. And
that had a bad experience, and it was like never again.
Yeah,
they
never
put it in
again.
their constitutions.
Exactly. So it's in their constitutions that the executive does not have dictatorial control. The Prime Minister cannot be a dictator.
He has to. He's no more powerful than the Parliament.
Yeah, and the population, they did not want this new system of reform to give the Prime Minister pretty much ultimate power for the bankers.
That's right, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But who demanded the changes?
None other than the City of London and Wall Street. JP Morgan's one of the biggest ones. There was a paper by JP Morgan that I've got here, was put out in 2013. This paper went through. They're crying over the post-war fascism, anti-fascism legislation and the constitutions.
Just before you read that quote, this is at the height of the Euro monetary crisis, the spillover from Greece. They just installed a government in Italy, and they wanted these changes that the populations were rebelling against, and they wanted more centralised control. So what did JP Morgan say?
Well, this paper, the Euro area adjustment, about halfway there. And they said, the constitutions and the political settlements in the southern periphery put in place in the aftermath of the fall of fascism have a number of features which appear to be unsuited to further integration in the region.
And the southern periphery means the southern countries of Europe, what became known as the pigs: Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece and Spain, the southern countries.
And then further on in the paper on page 12, they talk about the, quote, the political systems in the periphery were established in the aftermath of dictatorship and were defined by that experience. Constitutions tend to show a strong socialist influence, reflecting the political strength of that left-wing parties gained after the defeat of fascism. Political systems around the periphery typically display several of the following features: weak executives, weak central states relative to regions, constitutional protection of labour rights.
Oh, heavens above.
No. Consensus building systems which foster political clientelism, and the right to protest.
Oh no. You've got to get rid of that.
If unwelcome changes are made to the political status quo.
And that is explicit. Here's JP Morgan saying, we want a solution to prop up the euro and prop up the European banks, because that's our butts at risk here. Those constitutions that outlawed fascism are in our way. And that's why you said at the beginning that what the Italian people voted against was fascism.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a break. We're going to continue this discussion in Italy afterwards, but we'll tie it into the British Crown and the Queen of England herself. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing Italians join global revolt against banking dictatorship. And just before the break, Jeremy went through the JP Morgan report from 2013, which demanded the constitutional changes that the Italian people have just rejected. And it's a real black eye for this bankers' dictatorship that the EU actually represents. However, now we're going to hone in though, because when we talk about a bankers' dictatorship, you've got to understand how the banking system is not just some generic thing, it's specific. It's made up of people with a real agenda. And the heart of that agenda is the British Crown. So and what do we mean by that though? It's an easy thing to say, but what do we mean? And people always say, what are you talking about the British Crown for? Well, Italy it turns out to be one of the most clear-cut cases of the British Crown in operation with the City of London and how they work together. So first of all, the Crown City nexus, the Crown City of London Corporation nexus is the centre of global financial power. And the reason it's the centre is because it provides a legal haven that isn't available in any other country, in any other jurisdiction. The City of London Corporation predates the modern British state, right? It predates William the Conqueror in 1066. And all through the last 1,000 years, it's had a relationship based, it's had the benefit of a royal charter, and it's been exempted from most laws governing the rest of the UK. So it's an entity to itself inside the United Kingdom, right? You know, you can understand that kind of thing lasting for many hundreds of years. But in the last 200 years, we've had this, more and more countries have become democratic. Democracy's become a bigger deal. And that wouldn't, this City of London Corporation entity wouldn't be tolerated in a normal democracy. Why it's continued to be tolerated in the UK is because it's protected by the Crown, right? The Crown, the protection of the Crown extends to the fact that the Queen of England never enters the City of London Square Mile in London without being accompanied by the Lord Mayor of London. Even though it's a ceremonial thing, the city brags that their ceremonies stand for something. She can go to there was one pageantry thing a few years ago where the Lord Mayor was late to meet her, and the Queen sat in her carriage on the boundary of the City of London, waiting for him to meet her. And the media commented on this, and what people didn't realise is she just has no rights to enter, right? And so as long as Britain tolerates the Crown, which they do, which has a lot of undemocratic power itself, that is why it's that entity that protects this larger entity of the City of London, from which all the crooked banks in the world deliberately set up so they can operate from there, knowing they're untouchable, right? So that's the entity, and people can go to the CEC's latest New Citizen, page 3. We'll put the graphic on the screen, where we start to elaborate this in a flowchart in detail, and we'll be producing more material on this subject. In the case of Italy, though, this is what happened. In 1992, the Royal Yacht Britannia sailed into the Mediterranean with the Queen and Prince Philip on board. And they put down their anchor in the Tyrrhenian Sea off the west coast of Italy. And they held a function on the Royal Yacht Britannia. So here was the head of state of the United Kingdom holding a function off the coast of Italy. And at this function were the biggest bigwigs of the City of London banks and the biggest bigwigs of the Italian government, including people like Mario Draghi, who was the economics minister then, who went on to become the head of the Financial Stability Board in Europe, and now is the head of the European Central Bank, right? And at this function, to get everyone's attention before the speeches were made, Mario Draghi gets up, and the first thing he says is, "We're ready." Because what they planned at this function, these British bankers and these Italian government people, was the biggest mass privatisation in European history. It incidentally coincided with the Jeff Kennett mass privatisation of Victoria, which started exactly the same year, and it coincided with an even bigger mass privatisation of the former Soviet Union, right, which gutted Russia, and they're still paying the consequences today. Italy had the biggest state sector outside of the Soviet Union, and these parasites in London sunk their fangs into it, aided and abetted by these corrupt Italian politicians. They sold the equivalent of $280 billion worth of assets, but that was 30% of their real value, right? It was so big, the Italian stock market and that couldn't handle the sales, so that the sales were mostly handled from London and Wall Street.
And there's a lot of currency warfare at the same time to devalue the lira.
Exactly. George Soros launched a simultaneously attack on so what they were trying to do was, under this, they just signed the Maastricht Treaty. The Maastricht Treaty was designed to create a series of rules for all the states of Italy to give up of Europe, to hand over their sovereignty to accept a single currency, the euro, right? And under the cover of that, they rammed through these changes to the Italian economy, both forcing it to comply with the euro and mass privatising at the same time. But that's had two concrete consequences, Jeremy.
Oh, enormous consequences.
Well, I'm going to highlight two of them. One is this huge deindustrialisation that has happened to Italy, and this is a very advanced economy, the sixth largest industrial economy in the world, etc. It's been deindustrialised through this process. That's one consequence. The second consequence, which relates to the first, is last Sunday's vote, because it was the victims of that, the people who have lost their jobs. They can't. There's an Italian banking crisis because they can't. Italian banks have the biggest group of non-performing loans in the world, really, because the Italian people can't afford to repay their loans because of this deindustrialisation. They are the victims, and they got to vote on Sunday, and they've given these elites, this crown system, right, a huge black eye. It's not the end of it, but unless there's a change, the likes of that we're calling for, right, which is put these banks back on the leash, have a financial system that actually delivers for the needs of people, starting with a Glass-Steagall separation of all forms of speculation from real banking. This Italian political revolt will continue right around the world unabated.
Because they're killing people there. You look at the statistics on the number of births versus the number of deaths. The Italians are dying. And this is happening in the United States now too.
The latest figures just come out of the United States. The US life expectancy has just started to fall. That's a massive thing.
First time for I don't know how long.
Ages.
This is smashing industry. It's creating poverty. People don't have a future. They know that they will die under this system.
Yeah. All right, so if you want more on that, call in and get a copy of our latest New Citizen newspaper that I referenced with page 3 expose on the City of London, and our latest Australian Alert Service details this Italian crisis with sort of graphs that represent the economic changes, and you can get other information from those sources as well. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Syria. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, fake news losers in Syria. US, UK-backed terrorists routed from Aleppo. And right now, news stations in the West, around the world, including Australia, are reporting an ultimate fake news story, Jeremy, which is the fall of Aleppo, like it's the end of the world, right? Like evil has prevailed. And just as a little example of that, watch 2 minutes, 20 seconds from a Sky News report from the other day.
Street by street, pro-regime forces are continuing their offensive into Aleppo, clashing with rebels. While civilians risk their lives crossing lines into government hands. Children welcome the arrival of the army as its troops fan out through what was rebel-held territory. We can't verify when or where these pictures were taken, but they've clearly been released to present regime forces as liberators. Behind rebel lines, volunteer rescuers called White Helmets released this footage, the aftermath of a devastating attack on civilians fleeing fighting in eastern Aleppo. Bodies and body parts strewn across the street. At least 20 reported dead in almost exactly the same place as another strike yesterday that killed around the same number. Fleeing the carnage, a human exodus is underway. There's mounting international concern about those who have been able to escape. Observers say many civilians are being rounded up and detained.
The humanitarian situation is worsening. In the opposition areas, the siege continues, and refugees are continuing to flee towards Kurdish-controlled areas. The numbers are significant, and there is a need for action on the part of the UN to help those present inside the besieged city of Aleppo.
As many as 250,000 people remain in rebel-held Aleppo, caught in a ghetto now under intense bombardment.
The vast majority of the people of eastern Aleppo are still trapped in a sharply worsening siege, pounded by accelerating bombardment, and deliberately deprived of food and medical care. Many of them, including small children, report that they are simply waiting for death, a nightmare which clearly violates the most basic norms of human rights and any shred of human decency.
Now, the footage, one thing to point out, the footage in that report that's provided by the white helmets that they reference, where there's these bodies on the ground, right? They even admit there, the people that are dead on the ground were escaping to where? To the government. The people, they've just demonised the government as the source. These people were escaping to the government side. They're dead on the ground. The white helmets claimed it's because the government went and bombed them as they were escaping to their side. But there's no evidence of, the bodies are intact, they're not blown apart. There's no evidence of a bombing. They were shot as they escaped. Who shot them? The people they were escaping to, or the people they were escaping from, right? That's the white helmets, the biggest scum of the earth, funded by the United States and by the British intelligence. And that's one of the biggest fake news stories right there. Now, while I'm talking, we're going to play footage of actual people in Aleppo streaming to the government side. They're celebrating, right? Families are being reunited. They're getting fed as they get to the government side. But you can see US State Department people saying all the Syrian government is doing is butchering people and starving them, etc. It's all absolute lies. And because the problem is the Western media, ever since weapons of mass destruction, Jeremy, they've had such a vested interest in these lies. They've gone so big on them, they can't, they have to double down, right? To all of a sudden stop saying it, admits that they are lies.
Well, in the case of Syria, they think if they just repeat the same lies over and over again, you know, Assad's a butcher and all these people are dying. Well, the fact is that nearly 100,000 people have got freed, and they were provided with food, and they were provided with warmth and blankets and all these things, and the people were desperate to get out of that terrorist hellhole.
You can see it in the footage, right? They've been kept prisoner there for 4 years, right? By actual terrorists, Al-Qaeda members. People that are members of Al-Qaeda that we've fought in Afghanistan, and we've been backing them in this place, right? Anyway, the good news is they're defeated. Aleppo is about to be freed from them. The CEC, there's been a massive turnaround since the 17th of September. The 17th of September is when Australian forces helped America bomb Syrian soldiers in Syria that were fighting ISIS. We put a petition into Parliament this last week that we collected lots of signatures on, but there's a big turnaround since then. The biggest turnaround is because of this, the Russians and Syrians have prevailed in Aleppo, and frankly, because Donald Trump was elected President of the United States, and he just straight away said, we're not going to do this anymore. Yeah, right?
No more regime change.
No more regime change. And this has changed everything. This is a good news story. You're not seeing it on the news because it's fake news. But that's it. Run out of time. Thanks for tuning into this week's CEC Report, and tune in next week for more.